I mean, we did very little on YouTube before this on Zoom. One of the few things we had, will segue into the beginning of the year. I sent out last night. I know many people, way more people opened it than a regular email. When I sent out on Jonathan Sachs, Alav Shalom, what can I say? So I sent out that when he spoke 10 years ago for like the 10th anniversary of Torah in Motion. We actually did video that. That was one of the rare things we videoed, and I sent it out last night and whatever. So yes, I agree. It makes things much easier. And I just want to start the share by acknowledging, of course, as everybody knows, the passing of Lord Jonathan Sachs, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs. And I think I assume everybody who's at a Torah in Motion program was greatly influenced by him. His reading, his writing, his oratory skills, his eloquence, and the way he presented Judaism in such a way to make it so relevant, not only for, of course, well beyond the Orthodox community, well beyond the Jewish community and non-Jewish community. I see that Prince Charles today had a very beautiful little note he wrote to the family, and really he was Or Lagoim, a beacon of light, I'm sure, whose teachings we will be inspired for many years. So I just want to acknowledge that, and hopefully we should have, family should have a Yehi Zichro Baruch, and we should have good things. Okay, Rabbi Leibtag, you can start now.
Okay. I'll begin with where I come and left off. Of course, we're going to dedicate this year to Rabbi Sachs's memory, but he's also called not just Rabbi, he's Lord, and there aren't too many rabbis who are also lords, especially in modern day times. And remember, our title is from King Cyrus to Lord Balfour, and Lord Balfour was a lord in Britain, and in many ways, the way Rabbi Sachs saw Jewish history and his overview of Jewish history, his ability to see the wider picture. I think one of the greatest things that Rabbi Sachs was able to do, he was like the spokesperson of Judaism to the outside, to other religions. He articulated Judaism. He understood it way better than most of us understood it. In fact, it was after listening to him, you felt proud to be Jewish every once in a while. He did such a good job, and even better, he was actually right in what he was saying. So he was. He just didn't make. He simply said it so beautifully, and was able to present it in a way. If you look at the overall theme in Judaism of our being chosen to be light to other nations, he definitely helped kindle that light. So I guess it's our job not just to remember him. I'll say one word about memory, Jewish memory. There's memory which is nostalgic, and there's memory that's transformative. There's memory where you remember an event that happened, and you have fond memories, like you're remembering a loved one or something that happened. It's good old memory that's a nice feeling. But there's transformative memory when you remember the person, and that causes you to either improve or change your direction in life. Sometimes a memory of a loved one or a rabbi or anyone, when you have your insight, that memory is not just, oh, I miss their greatness, but that's learn from them, but their life can have an effect on my life. And what I decide to do in my life, what direction to take, what projects to do, what to be involved in, that in many ways can be affected by when you remember someone, not just the fact that they were great and they had a big impact, but they can impact you. I guess the greatest honor to someone's memory is not just remembering who they were, but having what they said and what they did, having that have an effect on your own life. Now, our bigger topic in general is basically seeing the hand of God in history. Rabbi Sachs for sure saw that many times. He spoke so eloquently about the return to sovereignty in the land of Israel, the Jewish people returning to the homeland as a key event in Jewish history and how that affects how we view things today. And pretty much the goal of our whole series is to have a better understanding based on what happened 2,000 years ago, the Cyrus Declaration, and how our understanding of the prophets and the works in the Bible of that time period, how it can help us understand, appreciate our understanding today, not just of what's the right thing to do, but to appreciate why there's so many different opinions. Okay, so let's get started for today's share. And I'm following more or less a schedule that we have that we advertised. Today's topic is the book of Ezra itself. We mentioned the book of Ezra. Today we're going to jump into the book of Ezra. But beforehand, like usual, we have to do a quick review of what we've been talking about. This is class 4, and actually, I meant to write here the book of Ezra. I have to fix that title, and that was last week's title. So in last week, we discussed Sefer Yirmiyahu, and because the first line of the book of Ezra notes Yirmiyahu 70 years that they finished, we had to go back and see what they were about. And then the reason we talked about it, because the opening line of Ezra assumes that the 70 years are over and it's time to return. But when we study the 7 years of Yirmiyahu, it's unclear, what are we counting from? Is it 70 years of Babylonian rule over the Middle East? And because year 1 of Bavel, according to Yirmiyahu chapter 25, which was year 4 of Yehoiakim, that was the year, not that the Babylonians conquered Israel, but rather that was the year that Nebuchadnezzar became king in Bavel. And that was soon after they took over the Assyrian Empire. Remember, in 605 BCE, he became king. 609 was the Battle of Carchemish. So basically, Yehoiakim's reign coincided with the Babylonian conquest of Ashur, of Assyria. And Nebuchadnezzar himself becoming king was 4 years later in the 4th year of Yehoiakim. Or do we count 70 years from the first wave of exile when Yehoiakim dies and his son Yehoiakim takes over, but soon after, there's the first wave of exile when Nebuchadnezzar took over the city and appointed Tzidkiyahu king? Or do we count 70 years from the 11th year of Tzidkiyahu when the temple was destroyed? Or basically, do we count from 605, from 597, or from 586? Right now, it seems technical, but that's going to help understand tons of things when we get into Sefer Ezra. Now, the other thing we discussed were the many reasons why people didn't return in 538. And again, I'm doing this to, I guess, Malamed Zchut, to understand why people don't make Aliyah even from Toronto or even from North America. There's a good reason why even after the Cyrus decree, Jews living in Babylonia didn't return. So the first reason is, we saw that in Daniel as well, are the 7 years over yet? It could be, and according to all those three opinions, they're not over yet. 539 is still not 7 years from 605. We're close enough, we're within 3 or 4 years of that. But is that close enough? Are they over yet? Maybe yes, maybe no. Maybe if they're almost over, now it's time to start doing tshuva, like Daniel was doing. So it could be, because the 7 years technically are not over yet, that could be why they don't take the Cyrus decree seriously, or that's why they don't listen to the Cyrus decree, because it's too early. Don't go back when it's not the time. Or it could be maybe it's over, but our tshuva is not enough. We have to do proper tshuva. Another good reason is because this can't be redemption. How could redemption come through the facility of a non-Jewish king? It's not like coming out of Egypt. We want a miraculous redemption. We want a magic carpet. We want miracles. We want Kriyat Yamsuf. The fact that this foreign king Cyrus defeated the Assyrians and changed his policy, how could that be redemption? We want something more obvious. We want God to come with fire and pick us up and move us in a magical way. Those are the three, I call them the firm reasons why people didn't come back yet. And then there's the secular reason, which I think was probably the most logical one. Most people in exile had lost all hope of redemption. They were disappointed by prophets. We saw that quickly in Yirmiyahu. We might have time to go back to it later today. Why was it that we have all these false prophets in Babylonia and in Israel telling the people the Babylonians won't destroy the temple, and Israel will remain forever, and the temple will remain forever, and there won't be a total exile? And because all these prophets promised this, and it didn't come true, many people, once the temple was destroyed, those who remained alive and went into exile to Babylonia, gave up on their Judaism, gave up on their understanding of Judaism, and they compared it to being like dry bones. It's like a death process, it's irreversible. And Yechezkel, the Navi, counters those ideas, but the fact that Yechezkel has to deliver the message of dry bones and telling the people we're not dry bones, these dry bones can come back to life, that tells you what the people were really thinking. And maybe Yechezkel convinced some of the people, but definitely didn't convince all of them. So I think probably the main reason was they lost all hope of redemption and just gave up on the altogether and decided to assimilate. The answer I didn't bring, which I guess you'd like to hear, is that really they did know this was redemption, but they were too lazy to come because their lives were too good. We'll discuss that later in the Kuzari. In, I think, 2 weeks from now, we'll see that Kuzari talking about why the people didn't return. So that's the background for today's shir. What we're going to do today now is we're going to look at the book of Ezra. We can forget everything we did till now and just look at the book as a book And I want to try to explain why the book is so confusing and why it leads to so many arguments about what happened when. So let's return now to chapter 1. We read this already the first year of Koresh, just as God said to Yirmiyahu. God inspired the spirit of Koresh. He gave his famous declaration about the Jews, allowing the Jews to return. And we talked about him saying whoever doesn't want to come should send money. We did all this before. And I think what we didn't talk about was, we talked about this also, that he took the kelim of the Beit HaMikdash that Nebuchadnezzar had taken out and he gave them to return. Everything's going great. That's the beginning of the book. That's the first 7 lines. Now, we're going to stop the share now. What I want to do now is close this up. Okay. I'm just going to pretend we're in class and do something really boring. We're going to do a quick read of the book of Ezra, not everything, just the key points of the book of what's happening, and pay attention. In the book of Ezra, there is no continuous chronology. Meaning, we're going to start with the first year of Koresh. We're going to mention very soon the king Daryavesh. We're going to mention Achashverosh. We're going to mention Artaxerxes. We're going to mention lots of different kings, but there's no continuous timeline in the book. This point is going to be critical for understanding all the arguments about the book and the chronology. The author of the book of Malachim, when Yirmiyahu puts together Sefer Malachim, the author of Sefer Malachim wants the reader to be able to build a timeline of the first temple period, because he tells you in what year every king became king and how many years between from king to king. The intention of the author is for the reader to be able to build a continuous timeline of all the events. You can have problems here and there, small little overlaps, but basically you can build a timeline of Beit Rishon, of the first temple period, based on Sefer Melachim. You come up with about 410 years of kings. When you get to the book of Ezra, the book does not do that. There's no way I can read the book and build a timeline. But there's no way an historian cannot build a timeline. And what we're going to see happening is we're going to take this book, we're going to use it as a key historical source, but within the book itself, I cannot build a timeline. Now, the question is going to be, is that by chance that happened, or is that intentional? The question is there going to be a thematic reason why the book of Ezra does not have a timeline? Or is it just by chance it doesn't have a timeline? We'll spend a lot of time on that. We'll start on that this week, and we'll spend a lot of time in the weeks to come. So let's get reading. If you have a Tanakh with you, it's fine. I'll use an English Hebrew because people complained last week that I didn't have my speed test was really bad today. So I hope you'll be hearing. We read through Pasuk 8. Okay. Now, why did we read till Pasuk Chet last time in Perek Aleph? Because from Pasuk Tet on, it's really boring. We start naming the numbers of all the different vessels that were brought back from Bavel at the end of chapter 1. If that wasn't boring enough, in chapter 2, we get a list of all the people who made Aliyah. Now, if you have to list all the people who made Aliyah, I guess it's like, remember the honor roll in school and things like that, or how many people donated money to a certain project? If you have to list everybody, I guess it's making a big deal about people who came back. But look at the very last line in chapter 2. After we get all the names of the people and all the different things they brought, and their animals as well, and their servants who came with him, what are we told? The last line of chapter 2 gives a very nice presentation. They all come back: the Kohanim, the Levites, the priests, the Am, the Israelim, the singers, the people watching the gates, the Netinim, I guess the lower class of people. Everyone's back in their cities, and everyone's settled down. Now, is that good or bad? We're not sure, but at least a community, this is what we talked about many times, this is the first time since the temple was destroyed and since Gedaliah was assassinated and the remaining people went down to Egypt, there has not been a Jewish presence in the land of Israel for about 50 years. For the first time in 50 years, there's a group of Jews en masse who returned from exile and set up a Jewish community in the land of Israel. The problem is going to be is that they're not the only people there. There'll be a local population that they have to deal with, as we'll soon see. Chapter 3 begins in a very nice way. What happens? Vayga Chodesh Hashvi, it's the 7th month, like time for Rosh Hashanah. The people were in the cities, like we just said. Vayesfum ki shachar Yerushalayim. It's Rosh Chodesh, it's Rosh Hashanah. They come to Jerusalem. There's no temple yet, but they're going to get started. Now we're introducing two key characters, Yoshua ben Yotzadak and Zerubbabel ben Shaltiel. We're going to find these characters in the book of Haggai and Zechariah. They're going to be key. In a nutshell, Zerubbabel, he's going to be the political leader. He's from Davidic descent. He's royal. But he's not the king because we're not sovereign. He'll be what's called a governor. Yoshua ben Yotzadak, he's slated to be, he's the Kohen Gadol elect. There's no temple yet, so we don't have a Kohen Gadol, but he's the highest ranking priest who returns. So Yeshua ben Yotzadak, the Kohanim, and Zerubbabel, the political leader. What do they do first? Vayivnu et mizbach Elohei Yisrael lalot alav olot kakutu b'torah Moshe ish Elohim. The first thing they do is build an altar. Now, why do they do that? Why don't they build a temple? You can build an altar in a couple of days. Doesn't take that long to build a mizbeach, to build an altar, depending how big it is. But it's not, you don't need an architect and have arguments how to build it, etc. You can build that relatively quickly. But a Beit HaMikdash, that requires funding. You need an architect, you need builders, you need planning. You can't build that overnight. Remember, there's no Mishkan, there's no portable temple. The plan was to build a temple, but they're not ready for that yet. They have the permission from Koresh to build a temple. But the first thing they do when they arrive, the first big holiday is Rosh Hashanah, they build a Mizbeach. They built the Mizbeach where it was originally built, on its base from before. Listen carefully. They come back and they're afraid of the local population. They have to be careful every step they're taking. If you do too much, the local population might get angry. And this is so similar to the Aliyah in the time of Lord Balfour, or basically of 100, 150 years ago. The original Aliyah movements that came to Israel were under foreign rule. We had permission from the British government, but we're coming back when there's a local population, there's an Arab population and a Christian population in Palestine at the same time. We're making steps in ways. We're going to build synagogues, we'll build things, but you have to be very careful because you don't want to get the local population to angry. So therefore, they built the Mizbeach where it belonged, but they did it very slowly because they're scared of the local population. And they bring korbanot, right? The daily korbanot, I think it's referring to Parshat Pinchas, the olot in the day and evening. Okay. Now, Sukkot, I guess they also did Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, or maybe they came a little bit, they came the 7th month. They don't say what day in the 7th month, but for sure by the 15th of the month, they're there in time for Sukkot to make a big celebration. That's Parshat Pinchas, and that's what we say in Musaf every day, 13 parim, 12 parim. That was the big holiday. So after the holidays, Achrechen Olat Tamid, L'chodashim, L'chom Moedei Hashem, HaMukudashim, L'chom Minyadeim L'davar Hashem. Basically, in a nutshell, the Mizbeach is working. We're bringing korbanot. What does Chazal learn from here? We learn from here that it's okay to bring sacrifices even though there's no temple. Modern day temple faithful people. In fact, there's a whole movement to bring Korban Pesach nowadays. So you don't need a temple. You don't need to rebuild a temple to bring a sacrifice. If you know pretty much where the Mizbeach should be, or where it was back then, you can do measurements. And people wanted to stick on the Rabbi and bring a Korban Pesach. Of course, they're not going to get away with it. But technically speaking, if it was permitted, you can bring Korban Pesach nowadays, even though there's no temple. You don't need a temple to bring a Korban on Har Bayit. You can't bring a Korban outside of Har Bayit. You can't bring it outside Jerusalem. But if you know the site of the temple and where the Mizbeach should be, halachically speaking, you can bring a Korban. Some people are very machmir on Pesach because if you're within walking distance of Jerusalem, of the temple, on the 14th of Nisan, on Erev Pesach, and you don't bring Korban Pesach, you're chayiv karet. It's a terrible punishment. Some people are machmir not to be in walking distance of Jerusalem on Erev Pesach. Some people are machmir all year long, and some people are super machmir, they stay in Chutz La'aretz all year long. That was this joke. Now, back to Pasuk Vav. Okay. Here we go. From the first day of the 7th month, they began to bring korbanot. The God's house was not built yet, was not started yet. So we see the Hechal is not ready, but you can bring korbanot even though there's no Hechal. Now what do? You have to start raising money. Vaynu kesef lechotzvim lecharashim lemachal mishteh v'shemen l'tzudim l'tzorim lavi atzei arozim min ha'lebanon el yam yafo kirishon korash melech baras alehem. Classic. You have to raise money. You need foreign workers. Jews don't know how to do all the technical work. So you need people from Lebanon, from Sidon and Tzor. Those are port cities in Lebanon, Tyre and Sidon, to bring the atzei arozim, cedars of Lebanon, like Shlomo did, to bring him to build the Mikdash. How do you bring him from Lebanon to Israel? You bring him by boat to the port of Yafo. Yafo, that's Tel Aviv today, the port of Jaffa port. And from there, they would bring him by foot to Jerusalem. And this was all with the permission of Koresh, the king of Paras. Okay. Now what happened next? In the second year now, when they came to God's house in Yerushalayim, in the second month, now we're in the spring, Zerubbabel and Yeshua began to do what? They began singing songs. They got the choir organized. So already a half year later, after they got the Mizbeach running and the Korbanot, they got the Levites. They got choir practice. They had Levites doing their job. Very similar to what King David did earlier. Remember from Levim from age 20 and up, Lenatzeach, to conduct all the work of the God, to take care not only of the singing, but also of the construction. And then we gave a list of all the people doing their work. And then Pasuk Yud, Vayisdu abonim et Eichal Hashem. They laid the foundations for God's house. It's not built yet. They laid the foundations. V'amidu kohanim melubashim b'chatzotzrot. They have the proper clothing. The Levim with their symbols. And to say Halal Hashem, I did David Melech Yisrael. What we're describing, we're trying to return to the great time of King David. V'enu b'halel bodot Hashem ki tov l'olam chesdo, right out of Tehillim. B'cholam heriu turag dola b'halel l'Hashem al hustad beit Hashem. We didn't build the temple yet. We laid the foundations. Now, everyone's happy. We're finally getting started. The prophecies are coming true. But guess what? Pasuk Yud Bet. V'rabim me'hakohanim v'alevim v'roshei avot v'azkenim asherot habayit harishon b'yosdo. The old timers. Remember, it's been 50 years. So people who were young when they went to exile, coming back now, the old timers, they remember what the first temple looked like. And when they see this building project, what they're starting with, they think the whole thing's a big joke. Okay? They're crying. You call this redemption? This is a joke, this little temple. On the other hand, the younger people who never saw a temple before, there's mixed emotions where the old timers saying, oh, this isn't the real thing, that this is far from the ideal. The young people, at least, were starting with something. And there's so much between the crying, the mixture of joy and sorrow is classic here. There's a mixture of crying and celebration. But there's lots of noise, big celebration. Everything's going great, right? Until chapter 4. And now there's nothing more similar. I'm sorry, I just lost my screen there. Chapter 4, we're back to what's called Masevot Simon Banim. Nothing much has changed. Okay. What happens in chapter 4? Vaishvut Tzarei Yehuda Binyamin, ki bnei hagola banim echad Hashem el Yisrael. Who are the Tzarei Yehuda and Binyamin? They're adversaries. They're called in English, or like in Yiddish, the word tzara, or a tzar, someone who's against you. People cause you trouble. So even though he's returned, there's a local population. The local population, the Jews are called Bnei HaGolah. They're the people who returned from exile. The word gets out, hey, they're starting construction on the temple. Whoa, they're going too far. What happens? These people have been living there for a long time, we'll see. They've been there since the Assyrians took over. There's a local population living in Jerusalem who is brought in by the Assyrians, who've been living in Israel for probably 100 years already. And what do they want to do? They don't want to stop the building. They want Jerusalem to be a united city. And they want this temple to be for everybody. They want like a one temple solution. And they want to join in the building. They want to be part of the building project because, hey, we're co-religionists. We serve the same God that you do. They say follows. They say, Ki kachem nidrosh lelechem, v'lo anachnu zovchim mimei arsor chadon melech Ashur amaleh otanu po. Say, we've been serving your God. If you remember the book of Kings in Sefer Melachim, I think in chapter 20 or 22 in Melachim Bet, when the Jews, when the northern tribes were exiled, what happened? The Assyrians brought in foreigners to settle the land after the northern tribes were exiled. The people came and asked the people, how do we serve the local God? And they brought in, Jewish people to give them guidance how to serve the God of Israel. And they've been serving the God of Israel because they hold he's the God of the land. They've been serving him for decades. Now, there's a great example here of Kriya Uktiv. What's it say? Velo or velo? Velo means, and they say, they're being to say, velo anachnu zovchim, lamed vav. So the way we read it, the way it's read is, and what they're saying is, we're bringing sacrifices to him for these last 100 years, but the Ktiv is lo lamed vav, like we're not doing it. So that's because are they, aren't they? That's a beautiful Kriya Uktiv between the two. What does Reuben do now? The local population wants to join in. They want to be co-religionists. They want to be part of the temple. So do I keep peace and say, okay, we'll swallow our pride and you can come with us? Or is it against the law? So what's what Zerubbabel says? Zerubbabel v'Yeshua, v'Shar lemor, lo lachem b'lanu. You have to read this carefully. No. Tell them, no. It's not for us and you to build this house for God. Ki anachnu yachad nivneh l'Hashem ha'Yisrael kasher tzivanu melech koresh paras. What they're saying here, what all the Parshanim say, is that we alone are going to build this house for God. Not together with you. Yachad doesn't mean together with you, but we, together with ourselves, we're going to build this house for God, as Parash said, but we're not going to let you join with us. And we'll see for the next pasuk, it's not, yes, you can, but no, you can't. So Zerubbabel and Yeshua tell the people, we're sorry, this house is only for the Jews, you can't come. Now come the most important psukim for our discussion for the next couple of weeks. Pasuk Daled. Vai am haaretz, brapim midei am Yehuda, umavalim otam livnot. The am haaretz is the local population. The people living, am haaretz are not the Jews. The am haaretz are the people living in the land, the non-Jewish people. They weaken the hands of Am Yehuda and they scare them from building. I call it the first intifada. You see what's happening? The Jews return. They want starting a project to build the temple. Sacrifice is fine. A temple wall, that's a little bit too much. The local population wants to join in. They don't allow them to build. You can't build with us. We can't join you. We're not going to let you do anything. And they scare them from building. And how do they scare them? They do two things. They have politicians and riots. They pay lobbyists, advisors, to break their plan. Meaning, what's going to happen? Because no one in Israel now is sovereign, only the Persians are sovereign. There's local governors. There's the Jewish governor and there's the non-Jewish governor. Over the other, each population, each ethnic group has their own governor. But they're all responsible to Persian control. Now, we have a letter from the Persian king. We have the right to build it. But the local population, you get a quick injunction. You can go to the local governor and say, hey, the Jews are doing something wrong. And we're going to see in the next chapter, there's going to be a set of letters going back and forth. We're going to find out about these letters, about this lobbying system, where the local population is going to start writing really bad things about the Jews in Israel, that you can't trust them, they're going to rebel against you. They say they're going to pay taxes, they're not going to pay taxes. They're going to bring tons of examples of how bad we were in the past, trying to explain to the Persian authority, don't let these Jews build a temple. And the Jews will write back letters, no, we're loyal, we're more loyal than anyone else to you. And it's simply a beautiful argument. It's so similar to events nowadays where we start a movement, there's an intifada, both they're scaring us to building and they're also using political measures, talking to the foreign powers to try to stop us from building. If you want to take it to the Lord Balfour, for example, it's almost like the white paper after the first wave of Aliyah. After the third and fourth Aliyot, and a lot of people coming, the local population say the Jews are going too much, they're going too far, they're building too many cities, they're taking away our rights, and therefore they put political pressure on Britain to stop the Jewish Aliyah and limit our existence here. Now listen carefully. How long is the building stopped for? From the time of Koresh, means from year 2 after the return, from year 2 of Koresh and the rest of Koresh's reign, until the reign of Daryavesh, the king of Paras, there's a building freeze. It doesn't say here how many years elapsed in between. We're going to return to this and spend a lot of time on this. It means there's going to be a gap, a building freeze, from the second year of Koresh until the reign of Daryavesh. How many years? Doesn't say. 5 years, 10 years, 20, 30, 40 years. It doesn't say what. We're going to calculate it very soon, but it doesn't say. And then the next pasuk is super cryptic. Pasuk Vav. Uv'malchut Achashverosh b'tchilat malchuto. During the reign of Achashverosh, in the beginning of his reign, they wrote a hate letter about the Jews living in Jerusalem and Yehuda. Which Achashverosh is this? Is this our Achashverosh from Megillat Esther? Is this a different Achashverosh? Is this happening after Daryavesh or before Daryavesh? Is this Achashverosh, the king in between Koresh and Daryavesh, explaining about the building freeze? Or is this a different time period? Totally unclear. There's no way I can figure out from the psukim themselves what's the proof, because every parshan says something different. The next verse is something about the time of Artaxerxes. Who's that king? But now, starting in verse 7 to the end of chapter 6, from verse 7 in chapter 4 to the end of chapter 6, it's all Aramaic. We're not going to read the Aramaic, we'll just read it in English later on. But that's going to be the exchange of letters, stopping the building and returning to the building. One king's name now becomes Artaxerxes. Who is he? Is he the same Artaxerxes from later on or a different one? Super complicated. So that's why we have to take it slow. Now, for today's share, let me stop and just check the chat real fast. See if I missed something. Chat, Alt-H. No, we don't see it that way. Here we go. Let me check the chat. Some reacher, a second. Oh my gosh, lots of things here. Okay, I'll take a break here for a minute. I'm just going to check the chat and see what people have been asking. Okay. I think everyone sees the. I think you see my screen now. I guess in the beginning you didn't. Okay. Okay. So it continues Israeli presence in land, not say the elites, but Amcha. Okay. So number one, if I follow the book of Yirmiyahu, there's no one left. There might have been a family here or there, but there's no Jewish community in the land of Israel. As far as the Sefer Yirmiyahu is concerned, anyone who left with Gedaliah, anyone who remained under Gedaliah, that entire group of people left down to Egypt. And that was it. No one was left in Israel. There might have been a couple of people, but no existing Jewish community that's recorded in Tanakh. Maybe they might have been there. Nothing that we have record of. I know there's a Masar that there was always Jews living in Israel. It could be one or two, but as an existing community with a government, with with some type of political entity, did not exist. Okay. Okay. Do you need a temple to sacrifice just as an altar? And the red heifer was performed along with the second temple was destroyed. Oh no, you need if you can have ashes from the red heifer from the previous temple. Okay. So the question is, how did they do red heifer? I guess they had with them before they built the Mikdash. Okay. Important Jews performed a helmeted kid sacrifice. Okay, I'm not sure of. Okay, some reaches say the temple was not on the Temple Mount, rather just south of it. Okay, where the temple was, that's a whole different discussion. Where on the Temple Mount was the original temple. But I think most of the research that I've seen in the last 30, 40 years, almost everyone agrees the temple, first temple or second temple was on the Temple Mount. All the excavations in Ir David and in the southern excavations south of the Temple Mount all point to not just the second temple being on the mount, but even remains of the first temple. And the sifting project that we have also shows a lot of remains from the Temple Mount, from first temple period as well. Again, the topography is also unlikely. In the story in Chumash, goes against that, because David leaves David on his way to Givon, and on the way there he stops in Har Moriah to where around the Jebusites' house is. So it makes more sense it's not on the same hill as David. Is there an indication in Sefer Ezra that Zerubbabel was correct in denying Gentile participation? Or was he absolutely correct in doing? That's a good question. Did Zerubbabel do the right thing or the wrong thing? I think he did the right thing. It seems like the temple was only for Jews. It's not. It could be they can bring a korban. Maybe they can bring a sacrifice as an outsider, but can they be equal partners in building it or not? It seems like he was right. It could be maybe politically he did a stupid move. He could have pretended maybe it's okay to go with them and then kick them out later on. But it's always what's called, with 2020 hindsight, it could be he made a mistake. But I think in Zerubbabel's actions, at least according to the book of Ezra, seem to be correct. And so Chrim seemed to be the word that Ezra used to we totally call pundits, okay? Oh, I guess go, okay. So the people, yeah, maybe they didn't have social media back then, but they wrote letters of hate. And we're going to see the letters later on in the next 2 chapters. Okay, so that's it for the chat. Let's continue now with our screen. Now, what I'm going to do now, I'm going to skip now all the Aramaic to the end of chapter 6. Again, chapters 4, 5, and 6. If you have time, I'd like you to read them on your own. We'll go over them in one of the following shiurim. After this time period, between Koresh and Daryavesh, after the building freeze, X amount of time later, the temple was finally built. That's going to be beginning in verse 14. I'll just read the English. The elders of Yehuda, the elders of Jews, built and prospered with the help of the prophecy of Haggai and Zechariah we're going to read about. And they built and finished the temple with the help of the God of Israel, with the help of the decree of Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes. In other words, we're giving thanks. The Shevet Yehuda, knows the Jews who returned, were able to build and finish the temple now with the help of Koresh's original decree, of course, with the help of the God of Israel as well, and now under the reign of Daryavesh, and whoever this Artaxerxes guy is, unclear who he is, but we're giving credit to 3 Persian kings who finally helped us get it off the ground. And then we get the date. V'sheitza baita dana ad yom talta li'erach adar dhi shnat shesh b'chud Daryavesh Malka. The house was finished on the 3rd day of the month of Adar in the 6th year of Daryavesh. We're going to see in the book of Haggai, they begin building in year 2 of Daryavesh, they finish in year 6 of Daryavesh. So again, what do we have? We have a jump from the 2nd year of Koresh, when they return, to the 6th year of Daryavesh, when it was finally built. We're going to calculate the years very soon. Then we're told when they finished building it, the Bnei Israel and the Kohanim and Levim made Chanukat Beit Hashem. They make a big celebration. They bring lots of sacrifices for the celebration. And then, since that was the 6th month, it's finished. And the next month is already, not the 6th month, the month of Adar is when they finish. Correct? Okay. The year Adar, that's the last month of the year. They finish building on the 3rd day of Adar. And then the next month already is Passover. A month later, they're bringing Passover. Everything's great. They did Torah already. They bring Korban Pesach, and there's a big celebration. And those who returned from the exile, and everyone who wasn't Tameh, who wanted to come to God, they bring Korban Pesach. They make Chag HaMatzot for 7 days. Chapter 6, in a nutshell, ends on a high note. The temple was built. They're bringing Korban Pesach, a national celebration, everything's great. Now, stop here for a minute. What should happen next? We've been waiting for this for so many years. What should happen now that the temple is built? What should we find?
A big dedication ceremony.
Okay, they did. Let's say they did that. It says they did that. What should happen now? The Jews who didn't make Aliyah, what should they do now?
Big
They
Aliyah.
all come.
Everybody should.
Now, if I go back to all the 3 reasons why people didn't make Aliyah, the 7 years aren't over yet. We'll see the 7 years now are way over. Maybe just now, but they're for sure over. Waiting for a sign from God. What better sign from God is the temple is actually built? The fact it's actually happening. The fact that we're back, God did not leave his people. In theory, there's no reason why anyone should remain in exile. Now comes the reason maybe they're lazy. Up until now, the Jews in exile had a good reason for not returning. But now if they don't return, if they're waiting for a sign from God, if they're waiting for the 7 years to be over, if they're waiting for some prophet, we have prophets now, Haggai and Zechariah. It's clear this is it. this should now be the beginning of redemption. The temple is built, everything should go back. We should fix the problems of Beit Rishon and Beit Rishon, and Beit Sheni be good. Now, in light of this, we'll see later, what Lauren noted, that they were comfortable. That could be. Maybe life was too good. But for some reason, they don't return. Definitely not in mass, because we're going to see a giant population there later on. Now, the next point is going to follow us the next couple of weeks. Watch what happens next. Remember, we're in the 6th year of Dayavesh. Let's go now to my screen. That was the end of chapter 6. Come chapter 7, and remember this, because we're going to return to this all year long. All next couple of weeks. Okay. What things? What we just read about maybe? During the reign of Artaxerxes, the king of Paras, a new king now. It's not Dayavesh. After these events, during the reign of Artaxerxes, the king of Paras, Ezra, and we get his whole genealogy, for Ezra all the way down to Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron Kohen, some 15 generations of Ezra, makes Aliyah, the great-great-grandson of Aaron Kohen. Who Ezra alami Bavel? He makes Aliyah. Who Sefer Mahir b'Torat Moshe? He's like a serious rabbi, big time chacham. Asher Natan Hashem el Yisrael, the Torah that God gave his people. Ezra is going to make Aliyah from Bavel. He's already a well-known Torah scholar, and he has permission and some protexia with the king of Bavel. The king of Persia. The Persian king Artaxerxes is giving Ezra sort of a bonus to go make Aliyah and do what he wants in the land of Israel. And who comes with him? There's a mass Aliyah coming with Ezra in year 7 of Artaxerxes. And they arrive in Yerushalayim in the 5th month, in the 7th year of Artaxerxes. And then we talk about these left in the 1st month. It was a long journey, 5 months of journey till they got to Yerushalayim. And what did Ezra do? Pasuk good. Ki Ezra yechin levavo lidrosh l'Hashem Elohei Torat Hashem Nasod lamed Yisrael chok mishpat. Ezra's coming as a religious reformer. He's going to come and teach the Jews Torah. What do we see from here? That Ezra was born and raised in Babylonia. He knows his Torah. He knows the laws of God. He's going to know way more than anyone in Israel. We see from here that there's a solid, religious, learned Jewish community in Babylonia, who now for some reason is making Aliyah to the land of Israel, but many years after the temple's been built. Now, there's a gap, and this gap is the most important gap to talk about. Between chapters 6 and 7, there's a gap in the book of Ezra. We're going from the 6th year of Dayavesh to the 7th year of Artaxerxes. Got it? What happened in between? Now, later we're going to get that. We'll suggest later on that might be in between. If I follow the outside history, we'll try to show that might be the story of Megillat Esther, which might be the background to understand Megillat Esther. What's important for today's share is that there is nothing recorded between year 6 of Dayavesh and year 7 of Artaxerxes. There's a total blank. Is that because nothing happened, or is that an intentional blank? And the book doesn't tell you what happened in between, how many years elapsed. It means we have 2 historical gaps in the book of Ezra, from the 2nd year of Koresh to year 6 to year 2 of Dayavesh, and I have another gap from the 6th year of Dayavesh to the 7th year of Artaxerxes. Now, in rabbinic literature, guess you know how they're going to solve the problem? In the Midrash, the rabbis are going to say between chapters 6 and 7 there is no gap. And they're going to say Ezra came the next year, and that's going to solve tons of problems. Those thematic problems, it'll create new historical problems. If Ezra comes this year, and what do they to say that? What do you have to say? You have to say that Dayavesh is Artaxerxes, even though they have different names. The rabbis, the classic opinion in midrashic literature, in rabbinic literature, is that from the 6th year of Dayavesh to Sefer Artaxerxes is the next year, and there is no gap because it's the same king. He just changed his name for some reason. Whether that's going to make sense or not, we'll study later in Ezra and we'll see if it makes sense or not. What I'm trying to show you is this book is intentionally, in my opinion, giving you 2 gaps between Koresh and Dayavesh and between the 6th year of Dayavesh when the temple is built until Ezra makes Aliyah. Why the gaps? We'll have to discuss. But there's a gap, and it's almost impossible based on the book to figure out the chronology. So now, what we have left time to do today is to show you how the rabbis solve the problem of how many years passed between Koresh and Daryavish. Okay? Now, I'm going to open up the book of, we'll do this real quick, and then next week I'll give you tables. You'll see. I don't want to confuse you with tables. I want to try and keep it as simple as possible. What I want to show you now is how the rabbis, very logically, are going to calculate how many years it is from Koresh to Daryavish. We know there's a building freeze from the second year of Koresh to the second year of Daryavish, and then it takes 4 years to build the temple. How do they calculate the years? So let's open up the book of Haggai real quick. If I open up Haggai, we'll deal with this much more in detail later on. Haggai is towards the end of Trei Asar. We just need the first line of the book of Haggai. And that is not good. Let me stop my share and reopen the screen. Screen share and Haggai. Here we go. Book of Haggai. Okay. The first year of the book of Haggai is year 2 of Daryavish the king. In the 6th month, on the first day. Rosh Chodesh Elul, year 2 of Daryavish. Haggai has his nevuah. And what's he saying in the name of God? Ha'am hazeh amru lo eit bo beit Hashem libanot. Everything we talked about, why people don't make aliyah, is right here. The people are saying it's not time to build. What happened? What do we see in year 2 of Koresh? The Jews come, start bringing korbanot, they start building their temple, they lay the foundations, there's an intifada, there's a building freeze. What's that prove to the people? This isn't redemption. The fact that the temple doesn't get off the ground is only proof that this isn't redemption. And when the news gets back to Babylonia that the temple never got off the ground, they're all smiling. We told you so. Remember I gave you the reasons why people don't make aliyah? One reason was the 70 years aren't over, or I need a sign from God, or this is a proof that they were right. Because if God really wanted them to return, and this was the hand of God, you start a job, finish it. How come the temple's not being built? How come this intifada is working? How come the local population is stopping them? How come the injunctions are working? What are we doing wrong? Well, the most logical reason is you came back too soon. And Koresh isn't Mashiach. Call it fake prophecy, whatever you want to call it. It's not working. And that only supported those in Babylonia who did not make aliyah. And so that makes the people in Babylonia who didn't return more secure in their decision. But think about the people in Jerusalem who did make aliyah, how depressed they are that nothing got off the ground. What's going to be the job of Haggai? Haggai is going to tell the people not to give up hope. And in the second year of Daryavish, we're going to say Haggai gets the people spirited to tell the people it's time to build. And sure enough, they in chapter 2, they're going to break ground on the temple basically 2 months later in the second year of Daryavish. Okay, that's it. Now, in the book of Zechariah, which is the next book over, the contemporaries, both Haggai and Zechariah, are living prophecies in the same year. As they build the temple in the second year of Daryavish, this is now in the 8th month in year 2 of Daryavish. After they're made that decision to build the temple, he begins his whole nevuah. He has a vision. We're not going to go into it now. What does Zechariah say? Because he sees a vision with an angel of God. Plus a good bet. Vayan malach Hashem vayomer Hashem tzvot ad matay ata lo torachem et Yerushalayim v'tarei Yehuda asher za'amta zeh 70 shana. In Zechariah's prophecy, this is not a prediction. This is a prayer making a statement. What's Zechariah saying? He sees a vision of a malach turning to God. He sees the city, construction beginning. He says, how long are you going to keep your anger against Jerusalem? How long is it going to take to have mercy on Jerusalem, who your anger has been kindled against them for the last 70 years? That's not a prophecy of what's going to happen in 70 years from now. That's a statement that in year 2 of Daryavish, it's been 70 years since the temple has been destroyed. Hope that's crystal clear. Zechariah is making a statement. This is an historical fact now, that year 2 of Daryavish is 70 years after the temple was destroyed. What's that proof? Remember the beginning of this year? What are the reasons why people aren't returning? 7 years aren't over yet. What's Zechariah saying? according to all opinions now, it's been 70 years since the temple was destroyed. So for sure the 70 years are over, and God has no longer any reason to hold things back. What do we see? Why were the people not building? The 7 years are not over yet. Remember all the different reasons why 7 years would come from? We gave all the different possibilities when we saw Yirmiyahu. You brought them up also. 7 years of destruction, 7 years of exile, 7 years of Babylonian rule. The longest possibility of 70 years is from the time of the destruction of the temple. He said it's been 7 years since the temple has been destroyed. Now it's time to build. Now, there's two sets of 70 years. There's 70 years that Yirmiyahu said in chapter 25 in Yirmiyahu, which was the first year of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babel. Okay, that was Yirmiyahu's Nebuah of 70 years. Starts in year 1 of Babel, which is year 4 of Yoakim, was 18 years before the temple was destroyed. Nice and simple. And therefore, what do we see from here? That year 2 of Daryavesh is 18 years after year 1 of Koresh. Got that? Does that make sense now? There's an 18-year difference between Yirmiyahu's 70 years and Zechariah's 70 years. Zechariah is saying it's been 70 years since the temple was destroyed, since the 12th year of Tzidkiyahu. Zechariah talks about 7 years of Babylonian rule that begins in year 4 of Yehoiakim and ends in year 1 of Koresh. So if there's 18 years between Zechariah's 70 years and Yirmiyahu's 70 years, there's when they begin, there's 18 years when they end. Therefore, from year 1 of Koresh till year 18, from year 1 of Koresh till year 2 of Daryavesh is 18 years. Got it? And now if I want to understand, why is it in year 2 of Daryavesh, how come there's so much movement now? Why is Haggai telling the people, yes, it's time to build? Because now everybody, Yirmiyahu's 70 years are over. There's no doubt anymore. And there's no reason to hold back. Which proves that maybe the people who didn't come before might have been right. But now the question is going to be, is this really it? It takes 4 years, but the temple gets off the ground. 4 years later, it's built. Once it's built, the question is, are the people going to return? We'll see that. They're going to send letters. They'll be asking questions about it, whether this is the real thing or not. And for our discussion, let me just summarize because our time's almost up. I want to get my main points clear. Next week, I'm going to give you tables to show how all the years stood up. I try to keep it simple this week without complicated tables. Also, I'm trying to explain is that there's a good reason why most people don't make Aliyah from Bavel after Koresh's declaration. A, because he's not Jewish, because he doesn't say it in the name of God. He's talking about Marduk. This can't be redemption. It could be Yirmiyahu 7 years aren't over yet. Or, maybe we didn't do tshuva enough. There's lots of reasons, and people don't come. And the best proof is the fact that when those who did come, they didn't get off the ground. But now that the 7 years are over, according to all opinions, because it's been 7 years since the temple was destroyed, now there's a new opportunity to build the temple. And now, just by chance, there's a new king. Daryavesh, there's a new kingdom in Paras, who's letting the Jews build. That's a sign from God, this is it. It's time for everyone to return, and the temple gets off the ground. Why the Jews don't return? Well, that's a big question. Now, it could be they do, and that's why Ezra makes Aliyah. If Ezra makes Aliyah in the next, if Chazal are right, in the 7th year of Artaxerxes is a year after the temple is finished, that solves all the problems. In Achinami, they do make Aliyah. Later, we'll see why that can't be, historically why that can't be. But it definitely solves that problem. If the historians are right, that there's a gap of some 50 years between the temple being built in the 6th year of Daryavesh and Ezra's Aliyah in the 7th year of Artaxerxes, what happened for 50 years? Why didn't the Jews make Aliyah? What went wrong? And we're going to use that later to explain what happens in Megillat Esther. Now, the reason I'm spending so much time, we'll spend a lot more time on this, is because this argument over what's the gap between chapter 6 and chapter 7 of the book of Ezra? Again, the first 6 chapters is before Ezra's on the scene. Ezra only comes on the scene in year 7 of Artaxerxes. Where was he till now? No, most likely he wasn't born yet. Otherwise, he should have come earlier. But for some reason, it only comes now. What happened between, we'll have to see. But depending on how many years elapsed between these two events, is it the same king? Is there no gap? Or is there a big gap? That's going to affect the Jewish calendar and what year it is. I'll just give you a little promo and then we'll end here and take questions. Promo is, if you hold that the Jewish year is 5781, then you hold that there's no gap. Notice that that's the year, that there's no gap between year 6 and year 7. Got that? And if we want to understand the Jewish year and its meaning and why the year is 5781, it all begins with this problem of what's the gap, what happened between chapter 6 and chapter 7 of Ezra. That's why I dedicated a shir to that idea. And what happened, what should the Jews been doing, what did happen, and when we finish, it might take a couple of weeks, it'll understand why the Jewish year is 5781, even though it might not be. It'll understand what's the background to Megillat Esther. It'll understand why we're skipping so many years in the book. It'll also help us understand Hanukkah. It'll help us understand tons of Jewish customs and laws and things that we do. And also help us understand how Midrash works. Help us also understand why there's the second Isaiah. Why is the second Isaiah hidden in the back of our book of regular Isaiah? This will be an anchor to explain tons of different things. They get really complicated. That's why I wanted nice and slow. And today's goal this year was simply to show you that the first 6 chapters of Ezra is one time period. Something new starts from chapter 7 on. The topic up until 6 chapters is why isn't the temple built? It's finally built. And then there's this big gap after it's built. And then Ezra's going to come and start recovery. So let me see the chat. Let me check the chat real fast. Let me stop the share. And we'll go to the chat. Okay, let's work backwards. Okay, the sources for 605, all the source sheets for this, the years, I purposely didn't bring them because it gets really confusing. Next week, we'll do it nice and Masudar. I'll give you all the source sheets, give the outside sources for the years, our sources. The start you saying 605 because different historical books will give you different dates for the temple being destroyed. Our school won't have these years. And we'll try to understand why. Okay, next time I'll send the tables ahead for sure. Walking tour with Josephus, okay. And okay. So for next year, if you can, for next week, if you have time, if you can read the Aramaic of the letters in chapters 4, 5, and 6, if not, we'll review it next week a little bit. What I need to do next week is try and show you all the different opinions of what happened in between and what's the reason for them and how, and I'll explain what's the reason for these dates, 605, 586, 605, and things like that. And what's happening in the time of Chagai, and this will lead us right into Hanukkah and the whole story of Hanukkah, etc. Okay, which ahead, what's safer? So I'm trying to keep with Ezra, and based on Ezra, I'm going to go back to Chagai and Zechariah. I say for next week, we need the book of Chagai. It's 2 chapters, you can make a siyum. If you have a fast day, you can make a siyum on it. The book of Chagai will be the main book next week. And next week will be a lot of charts and years, and it'll make a lot more sense next week once we see the years. Simply I want to show you. I think the goal is to understand why people didn't make Aliyah up until year 6 of Dayavesh and why they should have afterwards. Okay. If you want to read ahead, read Sefer Chagai. Okay. I'll send before. Okay, I'll send everything before Shabbat. One, I can actually send it now if you want. Actually, I'll send you a copy now. No, can I do this year? I can't send on the chat, can I? No,
you
I don't have the option.
That's the link, Rabbi. You can send me the link. I'll put it on the website.
Okay, I put it on the website, and you'll see why I didn't do it in this year because it'll drive you crazy. But then you can study the page. Now you understand the page better. No, I'm going to share it with you now. Let me put up on the screen real fast. If the share's over, you can stop the recording. But if you want to stay online for a minute before Rabbi Ramon comes in,
there are a few more questions, I think. Rabbi, I think there are a few more questions if you want to get to those. And yes, Rabbi Ramon will be starting at 12:15 B'Ivrit.
If you can, Jay, read me the questions I didn't answer.
Okay, hold on a second. Let me. Okay, the Talmud records that an important Jew performed the helmeted kid sacrifice in Rome, and the rabbi stated they could not stop him, fell short from condemning him. Not sure what that's referring to. I'm sorry.
I'm not sure that was either. Yeah.
Some researchers say the temple was not on the Temple Mount, rather
Yeah, but I dealt with those before. I did
Yeah,
those before.
okay. Topographical sources say everything crumbles. There indication several that Zerubbabel was correct in denying Gentile participation in building the Beit HaMikdash, or was he absolutely correct in doing so despite the consequences?
So when you were at the bris, we did those questions in the middle.
Okay, I'm sorry. I apologize. That's why. Okay.
Okay, no problem.
That's why I shouldn't be the one doing this now.
Okay. Okay.
Why could these series not have been asked? You answered that, Ruth. Okay, I assume you answered all that, Emmerich. Okay, so I'll keep quiet and assume you answered all.
Okay. Now, this is what I didn't do today because it's confusing. The first thing, I'll send you the sheet. Now, what we did today, there's two intentional gaps in the book of Ezra. Year 1 of Koresh, right? There's a gap till year 2 of Dariavish. Got it? This summarizes our share today. What we did. We went from year 1 of Koresh. There's a gap, right, to year 2 of Dariavish. There's simply a gap. We don't know what happened. Is that gap Achashverosh? Is it Cambyses? You have to see all the sources outside. Then they build the temple from year 2 to year 6. They build the temple. When the temple was built, there's another gap between year 6 of Dariavish, when the temple is finished, to year 7 of Artaxshasta, when Ezra makes Aliyah. What happened in between? Right? So in Seder Olam, in Midrash, there is no gap, and it's the next year. But in classic history, that's where the story of Purim happens. That'll be interesting. Then there's going to be a gap between Ezra's Aliyah and when Nehemiah makes Aliyah. And Nehemiah makes Aliyah, he finds a whole different city than Ezra found. What happened there? What happened in between? And then there's another gap between 12 years when Nehemiah comes back again and does things. But and that's when Tanakh ends in year 34 of Artaxshasta. And then there's going to be another gap between the end of Tanakh and Persian and Greek history. And all this is going to make the years really, really complicated. I'm going to try to make it nice. I'll try to keep it as simple as possible. Anyone who deals with this time period gets totally confused. And I've taught this so many times, and I'm trying to do it. You'll understand why I didn't give you this in the beginning, because if I gave you this, you'd be more confused. It's important simply to see the text first inside, what's happening in the book of Ezra. And only after your confusion in the book of Ezra, you can understand what the rabbis were up to when they get the ears out. If I want to when I want to match up the kings in the book of, let me turn off clear the drawings. Clear all. When we get to, there was all the different years. There was Yirmiyahu 70 years and Tzchariah 70 years. We'll have a table for all that. I'll send it to Rabbi Kalman so you can put it up on the website. But this is stuff you have to study, not read. Got it? You have to study these charts. I could show you the charts, but you'd be more confused. Now that we did the shir, you can study the charts and you'll understand it much better. I'll try that, and I'll give you. I'll send it to Jay in a minute. Okay, Rabbi?
Yeah. We'll
you don't need a copy of the book of Ezra that we read from, because that's, everyone has that at home.
Yeah.
But I'll send you a copy of those key sources as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so have a good day, everybody, and a good week. And
okay, thank you. We'll see you, please God, next week. And everybody want to get a cup of coffee? Misha Ashir Bevrich, Rabbi Monitin Shiral Shabbat Atida, artificial intelligence, robots, etc. Last week, for those who weren't here, or even who were here, was sort of the theoretical framework. He set up what the halachic issues are, and this week is going to be the practical applications of using your what's her name again, from Amazon, and Alexa, and all these other and more things coming in the future. Use on Shabbat. So that's going to be in 11 minutes. So you got a little bit of a break. Of course, you have Bivrit as Shir Bivrit is, and I told him to only translate the hard words this week. Last week he translated some of the easy words too. So we'll